All right, we're live for another episode of WP Crowd. Welcome. Today is going to be a good one. We are doing a intro talk to Genesis. Usually I have some news and stuff to talk about, but I think we have a pretty full house today, so I'm just going to go through. Introductions are going to take us a little bit here. So I'm going to start on my left for intros, starting with Jesse.
I'm Shelley Peterson. I'm a Studio Press recommended Genesis developer. I've got 2 Treehouse courses on Genesis, 1 on workflow, and I own my own agency, and I'm the Genesis guy over at WP Valet, so we're taking on really big projects over there. And I love being on podcasts talking about Genesis, so that's about it.
Very cool. Nick A.
I'm Nick Adams. I'm a WordPress developer. I am kind of all over the place, so today I'm in Rochester, New York. Other days I'll be in London, Ontario, or Hartford, Connecticut. And I started using Genesis about 4 years ago, and so I'm excited to talk about it today.
Awesome. Nick C. You unmuted yourself, then muted yourself.
Oh, so. I did. There we go. Great way to introduce myself. I'm Nick Ciske. I'm with Simber.com. I'm a WordPress developer. We have 3 full-time WordPress developers here. We do FileMaker and WordPress integration, and we're pretty much 100% Genesis for new themes. We do take on other work and really recommend Genesis to those clients because we just find it to be the best theme framework out there. So, oh, and I'm in Minneapolis almost all the time because I have a wife and kids and they don't let me be a nomad.
All right, Robin.
I'm Robin Cornet, and I'm based outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm a WordPress developer. I work exclusively with Genesis when I'm working on site. I also have built some plugins, a few that are on the WordPress repository and some that are not, and that's me. So.
Very cool. Shelley.
Hi guys, my dogs are just going off in the background. But I'm Shelley Peacock. I'm in Middle Tennessee, not right outside of Nashville, but kind of greater Nashville area. And I am a Genesis WordPress consultant, and I specialize in clients that really just aren't super tech savvy.
All right. And Steve.
I'm Steve Strunks. I'm in Columbia, Missouri. I am a WordPress developer, and I prefer to build themes using Genesis.
Cool. And as usual, I'm Roy. I am a WordPress developer currently working at Disney, and I build lots of stuff with WordPress. So today we're talking about Genesis. I wish I was an expert at it. I'm not. I don't spend too much time with it, or haven't in the past. I have played around with it here and there throughout the versions, and I've always looked at it, but I've never been a consultant who goes to it. So I figured today would be a good place for us to discuss the kind of nuances of Genesis, and for those getting into the consulting game or just wanting to maybe advance themselves past fine-tuning websites with settings and getting into the core code, the code of the website, Genesis is definitely a good place to start. Jesse, who is a Genesis fanatic, has an awesome definition that he said he was going to share with us. So, Jesse, why don't you start? Why don't you tell us what you think, or as you define it, what is Genesis?
All right. You're going to have to kind of bear with me because Genesis envelops be familiar with, and it has all of those too. So we're Rainwork, which has multiple definitions. It's a starter theme because the Genesis theme itself is pretty plain, and it's also a child theme system because when you purchase a Genesis theme, it's a child theme. So what we're dealing with is all of those together. So if you're buying a Genesis theme, you're automatically using a child theme. So it includes a style sheet and a functions PHP file, maybe some graphics, and that style sheet redefines the design. And Genesis, the parent theme, maintains the connection to WordPress. So you don't have to worry about things getting out of touch before too long. I mean, after 2 or 3 years, you're going to have some deprecation going on, and you're going to need to update. And by then, the design's old anyway. So I wanted to kind of relate Genesis as a car metaphor. So we're looking at something made up of 3 main parts. You've got the engine, the chassis, and the body. The body includes stuff like paint and upholstery and the finishing. So WordPress is the engine and the brand of the car. Genesis itself is the chassis or the car model. And a child theme is all the things that affect how it looks, the body and the paint, and like its body version, GTLS or something. So you can change all the finishings and the looks, and it would still be a Genesis car. You can change Genesis, and it would still be a WordPress object. You can change Genesis and still have the same look, but it would not be a Genesis car anymore. It would be a knockoff. So if you replace the engine, well, you kind of get the idea. It breaks down at some point. I mean, if you change the engine, it's no longer WordPress. So it can't be Genesis or anything. So that's the main idea of it. The idea that you can update Genesis, the parent theme, without breaking a site is one of the main appeals, along with the baked-in SEO markup and the security aspects of it. Because when you're dealing with the child theme, you're dealing with very little in the way of security. So it's easy to use. We like to use a lot of widgets for the basic users, but it's also a developer framework. It's very powerful.
Very cool. I think that's a good intro. So if you have any further questions about what Genesis is or starter theme, those kind of words, feel free to go to wpeacock.com, check out our latest podcast, and there's a live chat that we can answer some questions. But we're assuming that if you're getting into the code, you have a kind of a bare understanding of what child themes are and how to kind of create them and go forward from there. And you don't necessarily even have to create your own child theme. I think Genesis has a collection of themes already that you can kind of just plug and play with. If I'm correct, I think StudioPress releases a whole bunch of them, and I know a lot of community people or people in the community create their own Genesis kind of child themes that you can just kind of plug and then modify via settings. But so you don't have to always use it as a framework to build new things off of. So I know some of you are consultants. So how are you guys dealing with Genesis as far as it being a way to build out themes for clientele? Do you find it easier than, let's say, using a starter theme like Underscores, or are you finding it that it's actually you're spending more time with it?
I think the learning curve at first can be a little steep, and a lot of people get stuck there and they think, oh, this isn't helping. But once you get to your second and third theme, that's where things really take off, and you start to realize, if I'm going to be building 100 themes over the next 3 years, I want them all on the same platform. I want them all on the same framework. And for me, I started like 4 or 5 years ago, and every day that I have to go in and do maintenance or troubleshoot a bug on a website, I'm grateful that I chose Genesis, and I don't have to be like, okay, which ThemeForest theme does this one run, and how do they do that on this theme? And if it was all Underscores, you still have a ton of fragmentation of like, well, there's a million ways to do things. With Genesis, there's still a bunch of ways to do things, but there's the Genesis way, and as long as you kind of stick within that, you get a lot of continuity across dozens or hundreds of websites. And now that I've got a team and I'm building even more websites, it becomes even more important, because I've got multiple people, and as long as we're all using Genesis, there's at least some continuity amongst what we're building. And so if somebody goes or leaves the team and somebody else comes in, as long as they know and understand Genesis, they know and understand pretty much everything we've built over the last 5 years, and then going into the future. So just from a standardization standpoint, it's a lifesaver. Because otherwise you just have so much complexity and so much fragmentation of your code. I think you could do the same thing like Automatic uses underscores, and they have a similar where everything's forked from underscores, and they have their way of doing things. But I mean, unless you're going to go the underscores route or go with a really robust, mature framework, I think Genesis is one of the best choices you can make.
So to kind of hop along that line of thinking, one of the best parts about it, I think, is the fact that Genesis is free updates. So anytime you put it on there, you already have a team of developers who are doing, like, keeping up with all the vulnerabilities, keeping up with security, keeping up with deprecation, making sure that you don't have anything that's going to conflict with WordPress core. And that's probably one of my favorite reasons for using it is, I make that child theme based, child theme for Genesis for a client, but then they can keep that updated, and we don't have to worry that, like, oh, we need to check this code, we need to keep going back, because I know that, Studio Press and the people working on Genesis, they're keeping an eye on all that, and so I can feel secure in knowing that my clients are going to be all set, and I don't need to go in and check every single theme that I've ever made for them and make sure that, like, everything is all set to go. I don't need to go to every client and look for a vulnerability, because as long as they're using Genesis, that one place is kind of taken care of, and that's just fantastic.
So, Steve, during our pre-show a little bit, we were talking about how you currently are dealing with clients that are not Genesis. I'm curious, what is the experience like when you're picking up a Genesis, let's say, modification? Like, someone's coming to you and says, hey, I need a modification to my website, and it's Genesis, versus, hey, I have a website I need some help with, and it's anything but, or specifically, let's say it's a ThemeForce theme.
Yeah, it's like Nick was saying, like, you get into it and you have to figure out where everything's at. What template file is this in, or where's that? And it's very frustrating. It takes a long time just to find where everything's at. So Genesis actually would save me quite a bit of time if I was strictly working with it only.
Okay. I feel the same way. I think that, again, standardization is always easy, or the best way to handle large chunks of code, or let's say across many websites. Robin, you have kind of an interesting background with Genesis. I know that you've contributed a little bit to it. Why don't you talk about what your experiences with Genesis are?
I came into Genesis from using I guess basically a drag and drop, theme geared for photographers who, know Photoshop but not web design. So I came into Genesis not knowing how to do much of anything except, start hacking at CSS and just figuring it out. So that's been about 5 years now, and have, just learned a lot along the way. But, one of the things I love about Genesis is that so much of the heavy lifting is done for me. And I mean, just thinking about, one of the new things that they introduced in 2.2 was accessibility support, and there's a lot that needs to happen to make a theme accessible, and I add a couple lines of code to my child theme, and I'm most of the way there because Genesis is taking care of it. So it's.
Yeah, we've talked about accessibility on this show a couple weeks ago, and it is a hard thing to just get involved with. So the fact that you already have, like, a base that is accessible is pretty awesome.
And I think it's a testament to the maturity of the platform that that the latest Genesis was all about accessibility. There's so few rough edges to sand off at this point that they're really going after some of that really deep meaty, things like where, I don't know where underscores is at with that or any of the other frameworks, but like most of them aren't even talking about it, and Genesis has executed on it, and it's that's not low hanging fruit for most theme frameworks. That's like, oh, we'll get to accessibility at some point, and that just it's a testament to the maturity of the platform. And then now, if you're building something that's accessibility is required, if it's government or public sector, like why would you choose anything else when Genesis does so much for you out of the box? Sorry, the chat. It's really hard to like not laugh in the chat, and then you guys are all talking, and I'm not laughing at you. Anyways, I'll let somebody talk.
What can you guys say about the starting point of Genesis? So, if someone's just getting into Genesis now, not necessarily what's the starting point, like what do they get out of the box? So, like I know I use Bootstrap, right? And I know Bootstrap gives me, at bare minimum, I have a responsive framework. So, what kind of bare bones stuff does Genesis give me if I want to start creating a child theme off of it? Anyone feel free to answer that question.
I'll take that. I mean, you get the Genesis markup out of the box. I mean, all themes by default get that kind of Genesis markup, and it's HTML5, it's micro formats, it's got the accessibility baked in now, so you kind of get that out of the box. Now, people coming from Bootstrap or coming from SAS and less backgrounds bristle a little bit because it's really vanilla CSS out of the box. It's really clean and really well organized, but it's not SAS, it's not less, it's not Bootstrap, and so you don't get some of those tools. The beauty is because the Genesis HTML is so consistent. There's a SAS version, there's a less version, there's a Bourbon version, there's a Bones version, there's a Bootstrap version of Genesis. So it's essentially a different starter child theme that you can start from. And so they've essentially taken the starter theme from StudioPress, translated the CSS into your favorite framework, so you can still use them together. And then they've tweaked the output of Genesis so that it outputs the right classes and things like that. So it's, just because Genesis comes like that out of the box doesn't mean you have to use it that way. You can still use the engine with a whole new shell or a whole new body. You can use the Genesis engine, a different body than I use. Like we tend to fork off the starter theme and go from there, and we're looking at possibly integrating SAS workflows. But at a certain point, you can add those levels of complexity, and if they save you time and money, that's good. But at a certain point, there's some sites where the stock CSS works just fine. You do a couple tweaks to it, you do a couple tweaks to the media queries, and you're off and running, and there's no build process. There's no, it's simple. There's no dependencies. And so if somebody else takes over that website, they don't have to figure out whether they're using Grunt or Gulp or Compass or any of these other things. They can just take it over. They can put it in Git, modify it, and run with it. So I appreciate the simplicity of the out-of-the-box Genesis, where it lets you layer on other stuff on top of it. But what it does give you out of the box is clean HTML5, semantic. It's just nice, really clean, consistent HTML, and clean, well-organized CSS. So that's been battle tested across every browser you can think of. So that's what I love about it.
So I think that's awesome. I think that if you want to use another framework, there's obviously a addition that you can always add on to it. And we keep on coming back to Jesse's little metaphor for the engine. I don't want to dive too much into the code here, but what does the engine mean, and what do you get out of it? So let's just take an example template. Like you're building out a template for an archive page, which is your blog listings. Where does it differ? Where does the code differ in Genesis versus building it out without Genesis? And where does it save you time?
Well, because it's generated using hooks and filters, everything is selectable whether or not you want it to be included in that particular template. It all displays, And the two main choices are whether or not you're running the latest version where you've got HTML5, or are you running the old version with XHTML. So your markup would differ right there. But then you could say, well, I don't want the page title to appear. And you can do it in the PHP very easily by just removing it on that template rather than the whole site, or using CSS and have it still generate.
So the only way to modify an archive page is not necessarily in the code itself, but like, or is that like, when you're saying about settings and what you're turning on and off, is that, where are you changing those settings around?
Usually in the functions file or in the template file itself for 404 page or page PHP. You have to copy what's in the parent theme and then put it into the child theme, because you don't want to edit core files. And or you could do it in the CSS. There are some plugins that let you have options, but there's only one page of options in Genesis standard parent theme settings.
Does Genesis handle custom post type stuff also, archives and single pages as well?
The same way as other themes do, yeah.
And then how do you, again, is it also in the functions file that you would modify if you wanted the archive page to be separate, like have a different styling or different layout structure for that custom post type?
Well, ideally, you'd put that into a plugin, because that is function, not display.
Well, not the definition of the custom post type, but let's say archive for blog posts is one layout, and then I have another custom post type which has a different layout for the archive page.
Yeah.
That would all be done in the functions file.
You could either do it in the functions file or create separate template files that Genesis recognizes by the naming of the file.
Another way to tackle the different archive pages is Genesis offers a lot of filters, and I actually, updated my site a couple weeks ago and ended up using the Genesis options filters, like on my blog page and for 2 different custom post type archives. So instead of having to remove a lot of Genesis actions that were outputting certain things, basically I had this one filter and I just switched things off and on. And my most recent blog post on my site is showing the code of some of how I did that. So that was really nice, because it's very easy to make those modifications without saying, what do I have to remove, what do I have to add to change or redo what's already been done.
And that's the beauty of Genesis, is that instead of like in like an underscores, unless you have really good clean separation, and most themes don't, like you'd say, oh, well, here, let me copy archive.php and name it postslug-archive.php, and then I'm going to remove the stuff I don't want. Well, you just duplicated code. So now you have 2 copies of that code, and don't repeat yourself, right? So you've broken that rule of coding. And if you start to break it out into different template parts, like underscores would do, then you've got all these files that you have to go look at to figure out how is this actually built. And in Genesis, you can say you get custom post type archives automatically, instantly. If archive is turned on for that custom post type, Genesis builds an archive for you using its default loop. And then what you can do is you can reach in and say, for this archive only, turn off post meta. Because if that's the only change, that's the only change you make. So instead of copying it, you're just turning off a hook. So in one line of code, you've made a custom archive that is not a copy, it's not a template, it's just one line in functions.php, or ideally your functionality plugin, that just turns off the bits you don't want, or moves them around the DOM, or I guess around the filter hierarchy, which moves them around the DOM. So it lets you kind of work on the level you're familiar with. If you want to, you can do a page template and hack in there. If you want to do a filter in functions, you can do it there. If you want to do it in a functionality plugin, you can do it there. Or you can install a plugin that does stuff for you. There's plugins that allow you to turn things on and off globally across all Genesis themes, because the hooks are the same. You've got things like simple sidebars and simple edits and simple hooks, that because the Genesis hooks are always the same, you've got plugins that can reach in there and tweak your theme without knowing a thing about it. And you can just, click a couple buttons and poof, things are turned off or turned on or moved around. And, there's no other theme framework that offers that level of modularity and consistency across hundreds of child themes. So, I mean, it really lets you work at the level you want to work, and you can work your way up the stack. Like I started, copying templates and hacking in templates, and now I've moved, all the way up to most of my stuff happens in functionality plugins. Where I just wrote a custom staff plugin for us. All of the template logic is in the plugin, and it just reaches in to WordPress and says, if you're displaying the archive for staff, use this loop instead. So you turn the plugin off, there's no code left over. It's all in the plugin, but it's affecting the output and saying this is how to display staff people, or staff members, I guess, which is really, really cool because it's all contained instead of spread out across multiple things. And then, stuck in your theme, and then the theme thinks it knows how to display staff people. It's like, you know what? Really, the plugin knows how to display them, and the theme is just a container to inject that content into. So I just love the flexibility where you can work at the level you're at, and you can, choose the right solution for the thing you're trying to build instead of being stuck with kind of really only one way of doing things or really difficult ways of overriding templates and things like that.
Very cool. So we got about 3-4 minutes left here, so I want to go around one more time, and Nick suggested that we do kind of like a top tip here. Also, maybe give out a resource that you might have for people like that want to actually dive into Genesis a little bit more and actually learn how to actually use it. So I'm going to start this time on my right with Steve. Why don't you just give us a top tip that you've learned in your experience and maybe a resource you might have?
So I would recommend the Visual Hook Guide plugin. It allows you to see what hooks are actually on your live website. So you can see if you want to put something before the title of a post or after the posts, before the header, after the header, before the footer. So I really like that plugin. I'm not sure if I can post the link, but it's called Visual Hook Guide.
If you post it in the chat on our wpcrowd.com page, it'll just stay there. So just go over there, or you can send me the link and I'll put it up. Sounds like a plugin you definitely don't want to have running on production, though, if you're spitting out hooks. Yeah. Cool. Shelley?
My favorite resource, somebody mentioned earlier, is snippets, and to me, that's what makes Genesis so easy for me to build, as opposed to the stuff that I've done in the past. I started with Woo themes and then went to something else and something else, and by the time I got around to Genesis, I was like, it's a 4-hour website versus a 4-day website. And so one of my greatest resource is this guy that has his own website, Sridhar, and I don't know if I can pronounce his last name right, Katatam, I think, but I'll post the link to his site too. He writes tutorials for literally how to change absolutely everything, how to do absolutely everything, and he's been my greatest resource. And he has changed it to a membership site, but it is worth every penny. So that's my strongest recommendation.
Cool. Robin?
I would say my #1 tip, if you're going to really work with Genesis at all or experiment with it at all, is go ahead and figure out a way to work locally so that you're not working on a live website. And so my resource to go along with that is check out Desktop Server, because it's really easy to set up and super easy to use, and you're going to have a local copy of whatever website you want up and running in just a few minutes. So, not Genesis specific, sorry.
No problem. I think that's a really good overall tip. I definitely use Desktop Server locally myself for all sorts of cool stuff. All right, Nick C.
Oh, let's see. The tip. I mean, what I really love is, I mean, I find simple sidebars and simple social, and just that there's a couple kind of key plugins for Genesis that are so, I just use them on every site, and I love that simple sidebars makes it so easy to do that custom sidebar on the side, and it's not confusing like widget logic. Like clients actually understand, make a bucket, put stuff in it. And then like resource-wise, I would say Bill Erickson is kind of where I cut my teeth on Genesis. I would search for Genesis stuff, and 9 times out of 10, I would get his site. And he's just a phenomenal developer and a really smart guy. And so read his stuff.
Sorry, did you say Bill Erickson?
Bill Erickson, yeah.
Cool. I will put that into the chat. All right, Nick A.
My tip is definitely go to studiopress.com, buy because what that gets you is it gets you some resources right on studiopress.com that gives you lifetime updates. I mean, that comes with Genesis, but also it gives you access to their support, which is amazing. Copy Blogger does an amazing job of support with all their products, Rainmaker as well, and what it also gets you is it gets you the Genesis guide. You get all sorts of understanding of how it works. You can really dig in, and so I recommend doing that rather than just getting a copy of Genesis from a friend and then tinkering around with it, because you're gonna possibly get frustrated if you don't try and learn it. If you just don't learn about it and you just play around with it, probably not gonna learn all the awesome things that it does. So it's worth the $50 to get your own license and get access to studiopress.com.
Good stuff. And lastly, Jesse.
Well, I have a website that I've been working on. It's a shop called Genesis Theme, but I got kind of tricky with the domain, and it's genesis.me. I'm converting popular themes and premium themes into Genesis because sometimes clients come and say, I really, really love this theme, but I can't use it because it's not Genesis. Can you convert it for me? Which becomes a very big process. So I'm going to convert it once and make it available to people. Plan is to make them free if there's no support needed, because I think that's a good way to give back. And I do have a starter theme that's available up on GitHub that is mobile first and SaaS, if anybody wants a good starter theme. And I encourage everybody who's developing to create their own starter theme, because it will have what they want and they'll know where everything is and what it includes or not.
And Jesse, you also do tutorials, right, on Treehouse, right?
Yes, I have Genesis Framework Foundations was the first one, and we've got one that's Genesis Theme Development. They've since abandoned going further with Genesis, so I'm continuing under my own label, and those will be announced soon. Genesis Theme also has some products that I have not announced yet.
Ooh, fancy.
Yes.
Shelley mentioned there's a Slack channel for Genesis, so we'll put a link to that in our chat room. So if you guys want to get more information about Genesis and talk to some of these Genesis people, feel free to hit them up on Slack. It's all the time it's all the time we have today. Thank you guys for listening, and thanks for joining.